What's up, everyone? Welcome back to Fisher Family Adventures. Today we are back in my dock doing a video that some of you guys have requested before. I am going to show you everything I take on my boat when I go offshore fishing. So anything from fishing the wrecks 10 miles out to all the way 100 miles offshore for red snapper and grouper and whatever you catch. So all the gear, safety equipment, and fishing stuff that I bring with me. All right, so we're gonna start off with my boat electronics. So my boat is a Sailfish 290 center console. It's just over 30 feet long length overall. It's got twin 300 Yamahas on it, no joystick, but it's pretty easy to navigate. Got 2 live wells in the back, a bunch of rod holders, and a bunch of storage. So we'll talk about the electronics first. So I've got dual Simrad screens here. I use one as my chart plotter and then one as my echo. You can definitely get away with one and just split screen it, but you need to have some way to be able to navigate and tell where you're going, and also read the bottom when you're out fishing. In addition to that, I don't have a thermal camera or light bar or anything like that. I know some people do, and they can add that to their boats, and it helps running at night. Another thing you definitely want to have is some sort of radar when you're offshore fishing, especially down here in Florida when the storms can kind of pop up out of nowhere. You gotta know where you're going, and even at night too, or when it's foggy out, you gotta be able to tell where boats are. So I would say radar is essential if you're fishing offshore down here. So I normally do a lot of bottom fishing, not too much trolling, maybe some drifting. So you're gonna need some sort of anchor. I use windlass here. I don't think windlass is too necessary unless you have a giant heavy anchor. And I personally love my trolling motor that I have here. It's a Rodan. You can see it's mounted on the side. It's got a through-hole bolts to it. It holds really well, and I've got the battery bank on board, so it charges it through the motors, and I don't think I've ever charged it, to be honest, and it still holds every time. This is a 96-inch Rodan, and I absolutely love it. I would certainly recommend a trolling motor to anyone that is offshore fishing. All right, so we're gonna start here with a little bit of a comfort and a better ride for your passengers. So I've only got 2 seats in my console for people to ride on, so myself and one other person. Instead of making people stand or sit on the boat seats, I like to carry these bean bags along. So these are Ocean Tamer Marine bean bags. I can fit 3 of them in the back of my boat, and it is hands down the most comfortable ride someone can be on over a seat. So anyone offshore fishing with a bunch of passengers, I would highly recommend getting a couple of these bean bags. So like I said, they're Ocean Tamer. This one was about 150 bucks, and they're well worth it. Obviously, you're gonna wanna bring some rope on your boat, whether you need to tie up anywhere, you need to put a tail rope on a shark, or get towed in, you definitely need to have some rope on. Some of the stuff is kind of self-explanatory. Then we've got a cast net here. This is a black, I think it's a black pearl cast net. It is a 9-footer, and I don't use it too much just because I do a lot of fishing for grouper, and offshore, the little greenies that we catch down here, they're not the best bait for big grouper, but I still bring it and have it on board. And we've got our chum net, and I like this style better because you can reuse it. It's not so thin, it's more of like a larger hole around it, so you can reuse it from time to time. The bait doesn't get stuck in there and trashed. You can get these in any tackle shop, and if you're chumming up for snapper, you definitely want to have one of these guys. Next, we've got our fire extinguisher, and I would highly recommend, I mean, it's required by the Coast Guard that you have fire extinguishers on board. You do not want to get into a situation where you can't put out a fire on board when you're offshore fishing. You're not going to have a good time, and it is required by Coast Guard. Some people keep 4 or 5 or even bigger fire extinguishers, so I keep 2 on my boat. All right, so this stuff is also required by the Coast Guard. We've got our flares and our signal horn. And usually when you buy a new boat, this stuff will come with it, but yeah, we've got our flares and our horn required by the Coast Guard that you need to have on your boat. Not sure if this whistle is required or not, but it came with it. I'm sure in the dark or in the fog, it could be helpful to use. And then we've got our our hand bilge here. Thankfully, I've never had to use it, but you should have an automatic bilge on your boat, but just in case, definitely need to have one of these as a backup. This is something that I bring on my boat that some people don't have, and you don't need to have it, it's not required. But it's a life raft, so all you do is you unwrap it from the plastic and you toss it in the water and it self-inflates. It's by Revere. It's about $1,000. I'd bring it just because I go real far offshore, but it's not necessary. So it's a 4-person life raft by Revere. So let's talk about life jackets for a minute. So there's 2 different styles that I've mainly seen down here. You've got your standard or conventional one like this. Got to have these on the boat for every person on it. So I keep 6, and I just put them in my T-top. There's also this style, which you can wear kind of all the time, and if you fall overboard, you can pop the handle and it'll self-inflate. I like this style a little better, because in case you do fall overboard when you're running offshore and no one sees it, or no one sees you, then you can just pop it and self-inflate. I mean, either way, a life jacket's gonna save your life. Definitely need to have a bunch of these on board. All right, so this is an eperb, and an eperb is essential when you're offshore fishing. It is. If your boat starts sinking, or if you have some sort of emergency, you can pop it and it'll send out your location. So you can either mount it or buy a handheld one like this, but definitely recommend it having an eperb on board. Then this is a Garmin InReach. So I would recommend having one of these or a satellite phone on your boat, just so you can communicate, and it'll send your location out to whoever you're communicating to. So this InReach, you can text any landline or cell phone number, and it also pair with your cell phone. So you don't necessarily need to be texting on this little screen the whole time. And this was like $300, and there's a monthly subscription service to go with it. So this is a 5-gallon bucket, and I always bring this, whether you just want to dump it, get a bunch of water offshore and create a nice saltwater brine, or clean off your deck, or even bleed out a fish. Definitely got to have a 5-gallon bucket on board. All right, so this is a first aid kit. Again, it came with the boat. I've never had to use it. Just got some latex gloves, cotton swabs, band-aids, some antiseptic and gauze. Definitely good to have on board, I mean, obviously. Then you've got some Dramamine. Some people don't have this on their boat when they're offshore fishing, and unless you fish with the same group of people where no one ever gets seasick, you're definitely going to want to bring this on board. I personally have never been seasick myself, but been with people that have, and it's not fun. And careful, if you have Dramamine, do not mix with alcohol, otherwise it's like a roofie. So yeah, definitely bring some Dramamine. All right, we're gonna start with the fishing stuff now. First, I'm not gonna go through in depth of what you need to go offshore fishing, but in a sense, I've got some swivel, some weights of different types and sizes, some bottom rigs, hooks, I mean the whole 9 yards. And I have some nice tackle storage on my boat, so I just put them in these boxes and put them in the drawers. Then I've also got pre-made rigs that I bring with, so in case you break off, you don't have to retie an entire rig. So make them yourself. So I crimp a lot of my rigs, so I keep a little box with my crimps and my crimping tool in it, because I hate losing big fish, so I usually crimp them. We got some other stuff here. A glove. Some people don't wear gloves, but I personally prefer to, so don't get any cuts or bruises. Then you've got a couple things that are required by the FWC. This is a descending device. I've used them in previous videos before, but it is required to have one on board when you're offshore fishing in the Gulf of Mexico. Then also a venting tool, another thing that's required. After that, this is, I forget what these are called, but you put them under the butt of a rod and you're able to fight a bigger fish for longer better with them. Got our de-hooker here, pliers, and knife. That stuff is pretty self-explanatory. Now we've got two of our tools here. We've got our hook, you can grab stuff like buoys or anything offshore, pull yourself closer, and also our gaff. Pretty self-explanatory. Should have them on every offshore fishing boat. Got more fishing stuff here. Got a variety of leaders. This is a 200-pound leader I was talking about that I crimp with. I've also got some lighter stuff, some 25, some 40, some 60, just bring a couple different sizes. Now we've got our cutting board. You got to have one of these so you don't get your boat dirty. when you're cutting up your squid or your threadfin or your other baits. Definitely bring a cutting board, have one mounted, or bring one of these on board. This was a black tip one. I think I got it at West Marine for like 50 bucks. We've got our 2 nets, got our big net. Some people like to grab them with their hands, but I still think it's good to have a net on board. Then you've got your live well net, because if you're fishing live baits, you don't want to be using your hat to scoop out baits with them. Now we've got probably the most expensive part of this video is the jig and trolling lure and plug box. So we've just got a bunch of different trolling lures. We've got some vertical jigs in here. We've got some casting spoons. Just a good variety when you're offshore fishing, depending on what you see. If you see some birds, you want to troll through them, or you pull up to some good marks and you want to just vertical jig them. Then finally, we've got our rods and reels. So I keep a couple different rods and reels on board. Personally, for spinning, I prefer these Penn slammers with a Penn Carnage jigging rod. Prefer to have them for spinning. And then some lighter stuff like this Penn spin fisher for snapper fishing. And then finally, I've got our bent boat rod with a Shimano Talica if things get serious. Or at the end of the day, if you're tired, it's good to have a bent boat rod. You can stick in a rod holder and reel, and you don't have to fight the fish the whole way up. So that's everything that I bring with me on my boat when I'm offshore fishing. Obviously, that's not going to include stuff you bring like that day, like bait or ice or more rods, or towels, or anything else, food like that. So if you like this video, please like it, and thanks for watching, guys.